It started with a phone call. It was December 26, 1996, the day after Christmas. In Boulder, Colorado, a 911 dispatcher picked up a frantic call at 5:52 a.m. It was Patsy Ramsey. She was screaming that her daughter JonBenét was gone. She said there was a ransom note. And just like that, the clock started ticking on one of the most mishandled crime scenes in modern history. The question that has haunted this case for decades isn't just who killed the 6-year-old girl. It's another, more basic question: was the crime scene so thoroughly destroyed by friends and family that the truth became impossible to find? The short answer is yes, but the long answer is a tragedy of errors, a story of good intentions and catastrophic mistakes, all playing out in the first few hours inside the Ramsey house. It's a timeline of contamination that sealed the case's fate before the investigation truly began. The first person to arrive was Officer Rick French. He got to the house on 15th Street within minutes of the call. He found Patsy Ramsey distraught. John Ramsey, JonBenét's father, was there too. The French did a quick walk through the house. He saw the ransom note on the spiral staircase. It was 2.5 pages long, unusually long for a ransom note. He was told the little girl was missing from her bed. He looked in her room. The bed was empty. He looked in the basement. He didn't see anything there. He didn't push open the door to a small, windowless room in the basement, the wine cellar. He just looked through the opening. That was the first mistake. A small one, in hindsight, but it was the first domino. The much bigger mistake was what happened next. Officer French didn't secure the house. Standard police procedure in a kidnapping, which is what this appeared to be, is to treat the home as a crime scene. You lock it down, you get everyone out except for the essential people, usually the parents, and you confine them to one room. You stretch yellow tape across the driveway, you stop anyone and everyone from entering. This preserves evidence: fingerprints, fibers, footprints, DNA, anything the kidnapper might have left behind. Anything the family might have accidentally disturbed. That is not what happened at the Ramsey house. Instead of clearing the house, the police let it fill up. The first to arrive were the Ramseys' closest friends, Fleet and Priscilla White. John Ramsey had called them himself. Shortly after calling the police, soon after, another couple, John and Barbara Fernie, arrived. A victim's advocate from the police department came. The Ramseys' pastor, Reverend Roll Hoverstock, showed up. The house, which should have been a sterile crime scene, started to feel like a wake. People were walking around, they were talking, they were touching things. This is where the contamination began in earnest. Priscilla White, trying to be helpful in a moment of crisis, went into the kitchen and started cleaning. She wiped down the kitchen counters with a spray cleaner. She loaded dishes into the dishwasher. Think about that. A potential crime scene, and someone is wiping away any possible evidence. And fingerprints on the counter? Gone. Trace evidence from whatever the family or an intruder ate or drank? Gone. The kitchen contained a bowl of pineapple with a spoon in it. This piece of evidence would later become critical, as an autopsy revealed undigested pineapple in JonBenét's stomach, suggesting she ate not long before she died. Who wiped the counters around that bowl? Did they touch the bowl? The spoon? We'll never know for sure. The act of cleaning was an act of destruction. Meanwhile, coffee was being brewed. More people used the kitchen, they used the bathroom, they walked up and down the stairs past the ransom note that was still lying there. Every footstep could have ground trace evidence into the carpet or obscured a footprint left by a killer. Every touch could have smudged a latent print or left a new one, hopelessly confusing the scene. John Ramsey himself was not treated like the father of a kidnapped child, who might be a witness or even a suspect. He was allowed to move freely. At one point, he left the house to go to the bank to arrange for the ransom money, $118,000. He was gone for about an hour and a half. This is unheard of. The father of a kidnapped victim is a key part of the police process. He's the one the kidnappers are supposed to call. Leaving the scene was another break from protocol. The police officer in charge of the scene, Detective Linda Arndt, arrived around 8 a.m. By then, the house was already bustling with people. Arndt was a detective, but she had little experience with a case this serious. She later described the scene as chaotic. She felt overwhelmed. She failed to take control. Instead of clearing the house, she allowed the friends and family to stay. She tried to interview John and Patsy, but they were surrounded by their friends who were comforting them. It was a support system, but it was also a forensic disaster. Arndt's most significant error came a little after 1 p.m. The ransom note had said the kidnappers would call between 8 and 10 a.m. That window had come and gone. There was no call. The hope of a simple kidnapping was fading. Arndt felt something was wrong. She decided the house needed a more thorough search. She turned to John Ramsey and his friend Fleet White. She told them to search the house from top to bottom. "I want you to search for anything that seems out of place," she told them. This was the point of no return. Entrusting a search of a potential crime scene to civilians, especially a parent of the missing child, is a fundamental violation of police procedure. A trained officer knows what to look for and, more importantly, what not to touch. They know how to preserve evidence. A frantic father does not. John Ramsey went straight to the basement. The same basement officer French had glanced into hours earlier. He went to the small, latched door of the wine cellar. The door he had apparently walked past earlier that morning. This time, he opened it. Inside, on the floor, he found his daughter's body. She was wrapped in her favorite white blanket. A piece of duct tape was over her mouth. A nylon cord was around her neck and wrists. Her small body was cold. The horror of that moment is unimaginable. John Ramsey's reaction was that of a father, not a witness. He screamed. He ripped the duct tape from her mouth. He started to untie the cords. He picked her up. He carried her upstairs, through the house, and laid her on the floor in the living room near the Christmas tree. In those few seconds, John Ramsey, in an act of pure grief and panic, destroyed the most critical pieces of forensic evidence in the entire case. Let's break down what was lost. The duct tape. The end of the tape, the part a killer would have torn, could have held their fingerprints. The sticky side could have held fibers from their clothes or gloves. Saliva DNA from JonBenét could have been on it, but so could saliva from the killer if they used their teeth to tear it. By ripping it off, John Ramsey's fingerprints were now on the tape, and the original placement was lost forever. He also potentially contaminated it with his own DNA and fibers from his clothes. The ligatures and knots. The way the cord was tied around her neck and wrist was a signature. A specific type of knot could be a clue, something that might link to a suspect with a certain skill or background, like someone in the military or sailor. By untying them, the integrity of the knots was compromised. Any trace evidence on the cord's hairs, fibers, skin cells from the killer was now mixed with trace evidence from John. The body itself. Moving the body was the single most destructive act. When a person dies, the body goes through predictable stages. Livor mortis, the settling of blood, tells investigators the position the body was in after death. Rigor mortis, the stiffening of muscles, helps establish a timeline. By moving JonBenét from the cold basement floor to the warmer living room, he altered the body's temperature, which corrupts the time of death estimate. He changed her position, confusing the lividity patterns. The blanket. When John carried her, he wrapped her in the white blanket. This created a massive transfer of evidence. Any fibers on John's sweater from that morning were now potentially on the blanket and on JonBenét. Any fibers on the blanket from the killer were now potentially on John. It became a tangled mess, impossible for forensic analysts to sort out who left what, when. The blanket was no longer a pure piece of evidence from the killer, it was a contaminated object telling a confusing story. When John brought the body upstairs, the scene descended into complete chaos. Patsy Ramsey reportedly threw herself over her daughter's body, weeping. More contamination. More transfer of fibers, hair, and DNA. The friends were all there, witnesses to this horrific scene, moving around, reacting. The crime scene was no longer a location, it was a memory, clouded by grief and shock. Only after the body was found did the police finally seem to grasp the gravity of the situation. They cleared the house, they put up the yellow tape that should have been there 8 hours earlier. But it was too late. The horse wasn't just out of the barn had been trampled, dismantled, and burned. The rest of the forensic investigation was a desperate attempt to salvage what was left. They found an unidentified boot print near the body in the basement, but its context was ruined by the hours of foot traffic. They found a single pubic hair on the white blanket, which did not match anyone in the family. They found a spot of unidentified male DNA in JonBenét's underwear and on her long johns. This DNA, known as a known male one, would become a central feature of the intruder theory. But defense attorneys for the Ramseys would later argue that because the scene was so contaminated, the DNA could have come from anywhere, transferred from another piece of clothing, or even from the manufacturing process. The compromise scene gave them a powerful argument. The ransom note was another casualty of the chaotic morning. It was handled by Patsy, then John, then police officers. The FBI later found that the pad the note was written on came from inside the Ramsey house. The pen used to write, it was also found inside the house. Forensic analysis of the handwriting was inconclusive, though many experts pointed to similarities with Patsy Ramsey's writing. But because the note wasn't discovered in a pristine, untouched scene, its evidentiary value was weakened. It was just one more piece of a puzzle where all the edges had been worn away. So, was the crime scene destroyed by friends and family? Unquestionably. From the moment friends started arriving, walking through the house, cleaning the kitchen, and comforting the Ramseys, the scene's integrity was breached. They didn't do it with malice. They did it out of love, concern, and a human need to do something in the face of a terrible situation. Priscilla White wasn't trying to cover up a crime. She was trying to restore a tiny bit of order to a world that had just been shattered. John Ramsey wasn't trying to obstruct justice when he found his daughter. He was a father finding his murdered child. His actions were driven by instinct and grief. But the consequences of those actions were devastating. He single-handedly contaminated the body, the ligatures, the duct tape, and the blanket, 4 of the most important pieces of physical evidence in the case. However, the blame cannot fall on them alone. Every action they took was enabled by the inaction and incompetence of the Boulder Police Department. The police are the trained professionals. They are the ones who are supposed to know that the first hour of an investigation is the most important. They are the ones who are supposed to protect the scene from the raw, unpredictable emotions of the people involved. They failed at every level. They failed to secure the perimeter. They failed to control the people inside. They failed to conduct a proper initial search. They failed by asking the victim's father to conduct his own search. They allowed a kidnapping scene to morph into a social gathering and then into a homicide scene where the primary evidence was carried around and embraced. This timeline of errors had profound consequences. It created a fog of doubt that has never lifted. Because the evidence was so badly compromised, you could construct a plausible theory pointing to an intruder. The unknown DNA, the open window in the basement, the boot print. You could also construct a plausible theory pointing to the parents. The ransom note from inside the house, Patsy's allegedly similar handwriting, the pineapple in the kitchen. The destroyed crime scene provided ammunition for both sides. It ensured that no theory could ever be proven beyond a reasonable doubt. Any piece of evidence pointing to the Ramseys could be explained away by the contamination. Any piece of evidence pointing to an intruder could be questioned, because the scene was not secure. The case of JonBenét Ramsey became a public obsession, not just because of the tragedy of a murdered child, but because of the infuriating mystery that followed. A mystery born in the first few hours of December 26, 1996. It wasn't a sophisticated cover-up that stumped investigators. It was simpler and in some ways sadder than that. It was a cascade of human error. It was friends and family, in a state of shock, treating a crime scene like a home. And it was police, overwhelmed and out of their depth, letting them do it. The truth of what happened to JonBenét wasn't just hidden by a killer. It was washed away with cleaning spray, trampled underfoot, and carried away in a father's grieving arms. And it has never been recovered.